Hello, welcome to this podcast. My name is Kylan Hillman, aka Mangle Phonica, aka that guy with the sweaters, aka co-owner of Phonica Media. Who are you, my lovely co-host?
And I'm Madison Pfeiffer, aka Lady Phonica, aka the other co-owner of Phonica Media.
Yes, this is a podcast series we're doing, reevaluating the works of Taylor Swift. Mm-hmm. The Midnight's album just came out. You know, like it's only been like a month, right?
Less than a month.
Less than a month.
Weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, so like a couple weeks. She's doing an Eras tour.
Uh-huh.
We're going to see it.
So she, in spirit of her reevaluating all her eras, we too shall evaluate her eras.
Yes. But on very much our own terms and mostly for our own benefit. Hopefully you glean something from it too.
Sure.
We're mostly gonna go as chronologically as possible talking about each album. Mm-hmm. This first one, we're immediately breaking a rule because we're not just talking about the first album. In fact, we're barely talking about the first album for reasons we will explain. We're mostly talking about Fearless.
The second album.
The second album, because that's what I remember. So, Madison, aka Lady Phonica, aka co-owner of Phonica Media, I asked her to do this with me because she is, would you call yourself a Swiftie?
I'm a Swiftie.
Yeah, you're a pretty big Swiftie.
Yeah.
And so you have insight into Taylor Swift's career that I could only dream of as a result.
Most people could only dream of.
Yeah.
I'm an elite.
You're an elite Swiftie. So Madison is basically here to bring all of the important historical context of Taylor Swift's career. She's got her phone out. I got my computer. We're gonna check and research as we talk. We've done some of the legwork already. So I think that in setting the stage for Fearless, which is like, I mean, would you say that's, I don't want to diminish the first album too much, but would you say for like the wider public, that's like the first like really important one?
Yes,
okay.
Because Fearless is the first time she ever like took it on the road.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it wasn't even her own tour. She used Fearless as an opening act for other artists, I believe, like Rascal Flatts.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
That actually that brings us to the first thing that I want to talk about, which is the debut album is like a country album.
Yes.
Anybody who knows like Taylor Swift's whole career, who remembers her from the 2000s, remembers that she had a weird relationship with pop and country and what kind of style she fit into. And you can kind of see the shift towards pop music, whereas she started with country much later. But even just listening to the first album to Fearless, there's a huge shift that happens. Yes. So do you want to talk a little bit about like how she straddled country to pop?
Yeah, so she said in interviews and stuff that when she was first getting onto the music scene, she kind of envisioned herself as a country artist. I think I don't know if she would say this, but I would say it's probably has a lot to do with her lyric style.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, if you do listen to the very first album, a lot of it is really melancholy.
That's true.
And I think that, like, that is just suited to kind of country music in that way. Like
yeah.
The sad cowboy playing on the range.
Well, that was like another thing that, and we'll probably talk more about this, but one of the things that I noticed listening to the first album and Fearless actually is it reminded me of this weird time period where like pop country air quotes was a thing, and like you actually had a lot of crossover between country and pop music that I don't really feel exists as much anymore. Like listening to Fearless reminded me of like Lady A.
Yes.
Like a lot. Like Lady Antebellum for people who don't know that they changed their name.
Yeah. And I think that that's what she intended. I mean, she like moved to Nashville, and I think that she just like identified as like that is the culture, and that's what I'm doing, and I am country, and I'm gonna write music to fit into that. But I think, like, you know, as you see in her subsequent albums and where she is currently, that wasn't where her heart was.
Yeah, I mean, she's, like, completely abandoned it.
Oh, yeah.
It's, like, not a thing anymore.
And she abandoned it pretty early on.
Yeah, so one of the first times where she seems to, like, completely let it go, I think we would both agree, is Red.
Yes.
Okay, and then what interested me, because we'll get into this in later videos, I thought of Taylor Swift country to pop as, like, a clean break.
Yeah.
It's not.
No.
Red is mostly still kind of in the Fearless Speak Now era, and it has a few songs that are, like, wildly different.
Yes.
Also, do you want to quickly talk about the... I don't know if it's just your conspiracy theory or if it's a fan conspiracy theory that she was, like, putting on a country accent for, like, the beginning of her career.
Oh, yeah. I don't think I'm alone in that.
I doubt it.
I think, I don't know, to me it almost isn't a conspiracy theory. It almost, like, I would go so far as to say that's 100% what she did.
Well,
is she,
yeah.
You know, if you listen to her, you know, she's posted videos on social media, clips of her as a little kid, clips of her, you know, playing her guitar in her family's living room when she was a child. Like, she doesn't seem to have a country accent. We know that she grew up in Pennsylvania. All of her formative years were there. And she doesn't move to Nashville until she's a teenager. Suddenly, all of her music, heavily accented. She's got a southern twang.
Which actually, I did notice, the first album is, like, way heavier on the accent than the Fearless album is.
Yes, but there's still a lot in Fearless.
Yeah.
And then she kind of, like, is done with that by Red.
Yeah, it's really not on Red at all. And then, what, 1989's after Red?
Yeah.
That album's, like, obviously it's completely gone at that point.
There's absolutely nothing. And today, you know, you hear her speaking in interviews, like both her speaking voice and her singing voice, there's not even a hint of a southern accent there.
Yeah, and she just sounds like she's from, like, Pennsylvania / is generically famous person.
Yeah, generic, like, East Coast kind of accent.
Yep. Yeah.
And she's still, I believe her parents still live in Nashville. She may still have a home in Nashville.
Yeah.
I know she does a lot of political advocacy for candidates in Tennessee.
What was that one, the tweet that they talk about in Miss Americana?
Yes.
Yeah.
She, I know, has other homes in, like, New York, and I think she had a house in Rhode Island and stuff. So, you know, if her family is still living in Nashville this many years later, and she is presumably there a lot, you'd think that the accent, if there was one, would still be there and not suddenly gone.
Yeah.
So I think that I think that she was just like, I am a country star. This is what country stars sound like. If I'm gonna sell this, I need to sound like what they expect me to sound like.
And so this is all really to say that we've talked about how the country thing seems more like it was a means to an end than anything else.
Yeah. I think it was probably easier to, you know, just because I don't know, people may disagree on this. Country music seems like just a smaller industry.
Well, I could actually speak to that, yeah.
To, like, rock or pop.
Yeah, so, like, for anybody who doesn't know, Nashville is, like, one of the songwriting capitals of, like, the United States. So, like, if you're looking to get into that, it's kind of like, if you want to do, like, film, like, you go to Hollywood, you go to LA, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you want to write songs, like, one of the main places you can go to sort of get that career going is Nashville, right?
Right. So I think it was probably just, you know, her style at the time suited it with the kind of, like, melodramatic lyrics, and, you know, she was playing the guitar herself, you know, she wasn't...
Which is very much like a country thing.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that it just kind of suited it. It seemed like the way to go. I'm sure... I believe she signed a contract as a songwriter with Sony.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that.
I remember reading, actually, that she is the youngest person Sony has ever signed to be a songwriter. So I'm sure they took one look at her, listened to her demo, saw her blonde hair, blue eyes, this little girl from Nashville, and they were like, yeah, you'll be a country star.
Oh yeah, and it's totally easy to sell it. Like, you take one look at the cover for the debut album, and like that's totally what they're going for.
Yeah.
You know. Mm-hmm. Also, it's got weird like 2006 Disney energy,
yes.
which I noted in the car on our way back home today.
And as I was saying, it's probably like a lot of that is just crafted, I'm sure, in terms of marketing, and a lot of that was probably not her decision, and it was just how like the executives decided to sell this. But I do also think that she probably had a hand in it, being that, she was a teen at that time, and that's probably the kind of content she was enjoying. She was, I'm sure, taking in that Disney era music. She was kind of recycling it subconsciously. And
she also, like, when people would ask her at the time, like, she named country influences, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, like, she was into, what's her name, Shania Twain?
Yes.
Yeah. So she was into, like, Shania Twain. I think she was into the ones that made fun of Bush and got...
The Dixie Chicks.
Dixie Chicks, mm-hmm. Yes. Which is a really weird story. But I digress. The first album, I wanted to, before we get to Fearless, I wanted to just ask you, because I think we gave enough context for that and Fearless. What do you think of the first album?
I think Baby Madison...
Yeah.
When she was but a peasant and not yet a lady.
Yes.
Really enjoyed it.
Okay.
And I identified with it. I thought it was a bop. I loved singing along to it. That was also because I was like a young, dramatic kid.
Yeah.
Feeling a lot of big feelings. Going through a lot of big emotions. And now as an adult, it's not my favorite. I don't particularly like a lot of the lyrics or a lot of the music. My enjoyment comes 100% from nostalgia. It's like real cringe and corny. Yeah.
I really don't like it. I mean, I only personally didn't even know this album existed. Mm-hmm. I thought Fearless was the first one for the longest time.
And even after I told you were like, but it's not a full album, right?
And you were like, yeah, it is.
It is.
And I just didn't want to believe that there was like something before Fearless. But yeah, I listened to it basically once and did not care to listen to it again.
Yeah. If you don't, I'm 99% sure that if you were not like a young kid, let's be real, a young girl, mm-hmm. listening to that when it came out originally,
yeah,
it's not going to have any place for you
right
today.
So actually you bring up a good point. So one of the things I wanted to talk about with this first Taylor Swift video was the gender divide in her audience. Yes. And how you told me recently, I don't know if it was a statistic that you were drawing from, but the male side of her audience has actually grown since she released Folklore and Evermore.
Yes.
Right?
Uh-huh. I don't think anyone's done like an actual study on this.
Okay.
I think this is just like all anecdotal. I don't know. Maybe there are studies about Taylor Swift.
I'm sure there are studies about Taylor Swift. I don't know if it's specifically that.
But yeah, so when she started out, she was really, country music was and kind of still is held mostly by middle-aged white men.
Yep.
And, she was a young white girl.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that her audience was almost exclusively young girls just like her.
Yeah.
And I think she was making music for herself, for people like her. And I think that people who didn't fall into that category wrote it off and like weren't interested in it, made fun of it. Why are all your songs about boys? Like, that was like a huge...
That's going to be such a big theme through this.
that was like a massive piece of criticism she received and still continues to receive to this day.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
And so her audience was like mostly women and girls, and I think it was almost like an embarrassment to be a guy who was into, like, if you were into Taylor Swift, you didn't tell people you were into Taylor Swift.
Absolutely, yeah.
And now that she's released some more mature music. She's been dabbling more into fictional storytelling rather than telling from her own perspective, her own life experiences. She definitely has a different sound now. I have seen, and I've heard others make mention of this, that she's got more gender diversity in her audience today.
Right. And I think
it's less of like an embarrassment. Like, nobody really cares if you listen to Taylor Swift today the way that they would have in like 2009.
Yeah, I like, I'll like discuss Taylor Swift releases now with like other friends of mine who like make music and are, big music fans. And I think that also, though, speaks to the era that Taylor Swift was releasing her first few albums in, that she had trouble shedding.
Yes.
As she was maturing as a songwriter and an artist, because you have to kind of understand, in the 2000s, pop music was still not something that was like enjoyed or thought of as serious by music nerds and music critics in the same way that like rock music was, or like jazz or like classical and stuff like that. Probably by the time she was releasing, like Red and 1989, that still might have been a little early, but it was happening like around the time that, for those of you who are also fans, the needle drop like really started to take off. That's kind of when the era of like quote unquote poptimism really started, and like people like, not just Taylor Swift, like people look back on music from, for instance, like the 2010s and are like Taught in the Shadows was like in a video, Teenage Dream is like one of the best songs of like 2010. Like I think Rolling Stone also said that.
Yeah.
So it's like become acceptable to really listen to pop music deeply and actually think about what's going on in it. And I think that at the same time as that has happened, I think Taylor Swift has also just started to go in a more, at least to me, interesting direction, starting at Folklore and Evermore. Like, her lyrics have gotten much more dense.
Yes.
And that weirdly carried over into Midnights as well.
They're more poetic, and she's talked about before being influenced by poetry. I think she specifically is interested in like English poets, and I think you see that reflected a lot in her lyrics. And I think that it's more mature sound. She's talking about more serious topics. There's more diversity in the emotions that she talks about.
Yeah.
Whereas in her early stuff, I think her very first album,
right,
it was almost exclusively just her talking about breakups.
Yeah, basically it's even Fearless is mostly just a breakup album. Also, musically, I found out relatively recently really like shitting on Jack Antonoff, who's like one of her main producers now.
Yes. But
the production in Folklore and Evermore and in Midnights, like the actual soundscapes and textures that she's using and instrumentation and orchestration that she's doing, is just a lot more interesting than what was on the early like pop country stuff, where it's like there's like a banjo and a mandolin and acoustic guitars playing sus chords, and like there's a guitar doing the same solo that every artist was doing like in the late 2000s.
Yeah, the solo, TM.
Guitar solos that were on the radio at around when Fearless came out, they were all like 8 measures long and like only a few seconds. But yeah, even, I don't know, do you remember Orianthe?
Yes.
Yeah, so remember the one hit she had?
Yes.
That guitar, like, she's known as a guitarist, and that guitar solo is so fucking short.
Yeah, it's because that was, like, the only acceptable format for a guitar solo.
Yeah, and it really begs the question, because we don't have guitar solos anymore, and it feels like this weird transition point, so I, like, into the era of not having guitar solos, so I always go back, and I'm like, why are there guitar solos? Just get rid of them. They're too short. That doesn't, like, I guess they just thought something needs to go here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just feels weird to me because, like, also pop songs are, like, supposed to be short. So why add... And there was usually, like in Love Story, there's still a bridge. Yeah. So, like, why just stick in a random 10-second guitar solo? It's not necessarily related to Taylor Swift. That's just a criticism I have of, like, 2000s pop music. Is there any context that you can provide for her relationship with pop and country music in the Fearless era?
Yeah, so she was still integrated into the country system, the country industry.
Right, because, like, the first album was just, like, a country album.
It was just yeah. And so, for Fearless, you can tell that she is starting to test the waters of venturing away from that. But she is still within the country realm. She won some country music awards. I think she actually won Album of the Year. So, like, she was still there. But, you know, at that point, pop was definitely not ready to accept her. She would not have been considered pop at all. Even though you can, listening back today, you would probably call it a country pop album, but at the time they were like, no, she's just country.
Yeah, and it was weird too, because at the same time as, like, this conversation was happening about Taylor Swift, her, like, singles were getting played everywhere.
Yes.
Like, it did not matter whether
like,
she was pop or country.
Radio,
yeah, on Top 40 Radio, like, she was huge.
Yeah, Love Story was everywhere.
Yeah.
The Love Story music video got, like, a bajillion hits.
Yeah.
People loved that. But they wouldn't accept her. It wouldn't be considered pop, even though, like, for all intents and purposes, it kind of was.
Which is also weird because, like, I don't know, I guess we've moved on to other styles of music for these kinds of conversations. I feel like nobody gives a fuck what pop is or isn't anymore.
Yeah.
We can get into this a little bit now. I feel like that a lot of the issues that Taylor Swift has gone through in her career, I attribute loosely or directly to sexism.
Yes.
Because I think that she was, like, a young woman who was, like, really popular. And everyone was like, oh, you're not this, you're not that. Stay in your fucking lane.
Yeah. Well, that only gets worse during Red.
Oh, sure.
So during Red, and we're kind of, like, you know, jumping ahead a little bit because we do want to talk about Red in the future, but that, is it country, is it pop argument, like, gets just heated.
Yeah, it's weird. Because the country stops wanting her, too.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, like, setting the stage for Fearless. Is like, she's starting to make this transition. It's still kind of a long time in the making. So, let's talk about Fearless.
Fearless.
General thoughts, what do you think? Going back to it.
I still enjoy it. It's not as cringe or melancholy as her prior
Although
album.
it is very melancholy.
It is. You know, I still... You can tell a young person emerging into the romantic world.
Sure.
With its ups and downs, wrote that music.
And this is also, you have to remember, this is the Paramore era.
Yes.
This is when, like, emo music was still on the radio. Like, you had Fall Out Boy and MCR and Paramore, and there's, like, very obvious whiffs of that in Fearless.
Absolutely.
That were not there in the first album. You know?
Yeah, so I think overall, I have positive feelings. I enjoy it. There is still nostalgia there, but I also enjoy it just because I think that she is starting to get a real good handle on her lyrics and her, you know, the music, the production. She's, like, really in this sense, she's, like, finding herself as a musician. Yeah. And it's less of, like, it has less of a feeling of, like, a kid playing dress up to me.
I agree. I'm gonna say something that's, like, gonna be so off-putting for, like, almost everybody. I think this is, like, the only time that she really gets... We were talking about this a little bit. This Fearless is, like, the only time that she gets the singles right. Until, like... Lover? Maybe? No, not even Lover.
Even.
No, she doesn't really even get the singles...
Willow.
Until Willow.
For Folklore. I love Taylor Swift. I am a Swiftie.
Yeah.
I stan her. I don't know that her strong suit is selecting singles.
Yeah, everybody knows that if you listen to Lover and are a fan of that album, what's the song called? The Cool Summer or Cruel Summer?
Cruel Summer.
Yeah, Cruel. Everyone knows that, like, Swifties think that Cruel Summer should have been a single. And I listened to it, they're right. They're absolutely right. But for Fearless, the singles are all great.
Yeah.
They're like some of the best songs on the album.
Yes.
It's 15.
Yeah,
15's really good.
Love Story. You liked You Belong With Me.
Yes. You Belong With Me is so good. So you also have to remember that even though I was, like, you know, a young boy at the time when this came out, and I was like, ew, Taylor Swift is yucky, I liked it. So, like, these songs, these singles especially, because I heard them on the radio, they're super nostalgic for me.
Yeah.
And You Belong With Me, I think, is probably one of my favorite pieces of storytelling. But I think across the board, her singles, a theme running through the singles is that they just have, like, A-plus storytelling in them.
Yes. I think that she is a really good storyteller. Again, getting a little bit off track, but if she wrote, like, a fictional book, I think it would be, like, really good.
Yeah, I think so. One of the comments or thoughts that I had that I wrote down in my notes was that if I had a preteen daughter, I would want her to listen to this album. Because it's really, like, wholesome. It really gets that perspective because Taylor was so young and she was 19?
I think she was 19.
Yeah, so, she was, like, coming hot off of, like, being in high school. It was, like, literally probably only a year ago.
And some of these songs, I believe she, like, wrote in high school. Like, 15, she
probably wrote when she was 16.
Yeah, like, I think that, it's not like she just, like, sat down one day and just wrote all these songs. These were all concepts and ideas coming from her life in the years leading up to it.
Which we will talk, the idea that she doesn't always just write new songs for each album, we will come back to for the Swiftie conspiracists. That's more of a Midnight's thing, though.
Yeah.
So, what is your favorite of the singles? Let's kind of just get through those first.
My favorite of the singles, I think I just have to go with Love Story.
Love Story's classic.
It's classic. I just enjoy a lot about it.
Well, one thing that I pointed out to you when we were talking about this, because I think my favorite is probably still You Belong With Me and yours is Love Story.
Yeah.
And you're really into historical fiction.
Yes.
And so Love Story, obviously...
I mean, it's based off of Shakespeare,
of course.
Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
Although she takes extreme liberties with the ending of that story.
She She really does. She takes extreme liberties. She also condenses a lot of it. Although a lot of, like, Romeo and Juliet is just, like, them running around and fighting.
Yeah.
Which she kind of just obviously cuts that out. I think I have a funny anecdote from myself listening to that song. When she says, "We were both young when I first saw you, I close my eyes and the flashback starts." For some reason, I always interpreted that line because, like, I'm not a huge lyrics person, and a lot of the time I'm paying more attention to the music than the lyrics. I sort of half heard those two lines for, like, a long time, and I just assumed that what was happening in the song was this, like, lady sees just some random person across the bar. This is my headcanon. And she just, like, imagines the entire story of Romeo and Juliet, but with this guy.
Yeah.
In her head. In that moment.
Yes.
And it's my favorite thing. I think about it constantly when I listen to the song. One thing that, Love Story does that all of them do, the instrumentation on the album is very consistent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, like, there's almost always violins. Mandolin. Love Story starts with a banjo.
Yes.
And the chorus of Love Story is this, like, big, bright, anthemic thing that she does for, like, a while. And you could argue she still does really anthemic choruses to this day. It's just that the tone of them and the style of them and the vibe has kind of changed. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the other things besides the storytelling that you can tell right off the bat is, like, really impressive about Taylor Swift's writing is just that her choruses are, like, really beautiful. Like, her melodies are so good.
She's really good at writing a chorus.
Yes.
Yeah, that's probably, like, one of her biggest talents.
I would agree. I would 100% agree. Are there any B-sides that you kind of want to note or talk about? I have a few. What did you want to say about You're Not Sorry?
I really like that song. I really like the visual of her being sad in a bathtub. Yeah, I think that You're Not Sorry is definitely like as a concept is something that feels very teen.
Yeah.
And very, like, I've been there. I once was like, you're not sorry you did this to me. You're saying you're sorry, but you're not sorry.
Yeah, right.
And so that was definitely one of the B-sides that I was, like, into hardcore when this came out.
I mean, I think that the weirdest thing about Taylor for the longest time being such a girl's girl when it comes to her fan base is that, like, her songs are relatable for everybody. Like, that feeling of, like, you're not sorry.
Yeah.
I think everybody who has been a young person can relate to feeling that way. I know I felt that way multiple times. Mm-hmm. Mostly because when I was a teenager, I was not a very good person. But
what teenager was?
Who was a good person when they were a teenager? Another one that I wanted to mention is sort of the covert single of Fearless, which is Hey Steven.
Yes.
Which I think, one, it's just like a really good song, but it's kind of one of the few it's really romantic without being melancholy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's just talking about how much she likes Steven.
She's way into Steven.
And she still plays that song, right? Sometimes.
Yeah, she sometimes brings that back for concerts.
That's like a fan favorite.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that White Horse lyrically is interesting from the perspective of spoofing fairy tale themes, which she sort of does in, like, Love Story too.
Yeah, I think that she is just generally a person who enjoys
a fable,
a fairy tale. I mean, Bejeweled.
Yeah.
The music video for Bejeweled off of Midnights is like a Cinderella kind of thing.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
I think it's fun to see going all the way back that's just who she is as an artist. She loves a fable.
Right. And I think I also want to say, like, people talk sometimes about how more recently she's been into writing fictional accounts of things. Mm-hmm. And that's always been there. Like, Love Story is, like, one of her biggest songs of all time, and that's a fictional account of a thing.
Yes.
Like, Taylor's not literally saying that she lived through Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
So it's interesting to me that's kind of always been in her music. There's a lot of things you'll notice that people say about her music now of something she's doing now being good as opposed to what she was doing before, whereas she was kind of always doing that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the main things that has changed is just the way that she says it. That has gotten more complex, and the musical choices. Mm-hmm. Right? So I think from a music perspective in this album, I also want to say that there's not a whole lot to be said from track to track, because orchestrationally, most of the album is the same. It's got all the same instruments on it. Harmonically, it's all mostly the same. It's all kind of like, they're all 4-chord songs for the most part. If anybody knows what the axis progression is, these are all like axis progressions. One thing that I will note for people who know a thing or two about chords is that this is a weird period in time where sus chords were like a big thing in pop music. And I think one of the reasons for that is kind of the country tie-in, where there's a lot of acoustic guitars that play those kinds of chords much more easily, because one, they use a lot of open strings, and two, because the way that like sus chords, those kinds of chords work on guitar, you can kind of like park your 2 of your fingers on one spot on the guitar and just play the whole chord progression, only moving like half of your fingers. So, like, think, for anybody who wants a really clear example of that, think about, like, Wonderwall by Oasis. So the way that song is played is you just put your ring and pinky on the 3rd fret of the B and E string on the guitar, and you play all the chords like that. The way that the melodies are written is pretty consistent with how Taylor will write a lot of her melodies in the future. She has this really specific thing that she does where she will just, like, you might have even noticed this, even as someone who doesn't know music in that way. She has this thing where she'll just take, like, an interval or some kind of, like, 2-note idea and does it, like, fairly repetitively.
Okay. Yeah.
As the chords, like, move under her. Mm-hmm. People have actually talked about that as something that modern pop music does a lot. And it seems to me that is maybe not something that she started, but something that she probably made popular just because she was so prominent at that time. I think other B-sides, I like Breathe a lot. Are you a fan of Breathe?
I am a fan of Breathe. I also really loved Colby Calais at this time.
Yeah.
And it was really awesome for me to hear, like, 2 of my my favorite artists come together.
Now, what has Colby Calais done? Because I'm not very familiar with them.
She is kind of like pop indie music in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And if I'm remembering correctly, Taylor Swift even, like, worked with her, like, studied her lyric writing.
Oh.
Like, they collaborated on that song specifically, but larger as a whole, Taylor has talked about being heavily influenced by Colby's lyrics. And, you know, just as an aside, Taylor's re-recording a lot of her songs, and she was able to, they're still friends, she was able to get Colby to come back and re-record that with her this many years later.
And I think that's one of the interesting things about Taylor to me. You can kind of use her features at all times in her career. You can use her features as some kind of look into what she's listening to and what she's inspired by.
Oh yeah, she's talked about wanting to collaborate with people that she is actively listening to, engaging with their stuff. Yeah. She hears it and she wants to be a part of it.
Right, like, I mean, recently she had Lana Del Rey on Snow on the Beach. She obviously did Exile with the singer from Bon Iver and I forget what he plays, but the dude from The National.
Yeah.
Who actually does a lot of really cool stuff. Another B-side that's really good is Forever and Always. How do you feel about that song?
I like it.
Yeah.
It's not one of my top favorites.
So, just kind of like dipping into, because like Forever and Always is a really upbeat song. I think that the chorus is particularly well written, especially for one of the B-sides on this. And I think any song that she does that has a really like catchy and grabbing like tagline.
Yeah.
I think she's really good at doing that, and I think this is one of the songs that does that really well.
Yeah, I think it does. What it is for me that makes me not love it as much is it feels like one of the more cringe.
I agree.
You know, sets of lyrics.
Yeah. This album is not immune to cringe.
No. It has cringe. It's not as bad as the first one, but it still has its cringe, and I think Forever and Always is part of that cringe.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of, whereas like the first album is kind of like ugh, cringe, like this album is kind of like I remember when I was embarrassing memories.
Been there.
And then the other one that I really like is The Best Day. So really quickly, before I kind of say why I like The Best Day so much, tell me what you think about The Best Day.
The Best Day is, I find it enjoyable. I also find it a little bit boring.
Sure.
I think it's just a song about her having a good time with her dad.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of it for me. It's just like there's not a whole lot there for me to really digest.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, yeah, that sounds nice, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, The Best Day, from a musical perspective, I think it's a nice chill point at the end of the album, where it sort of breaks up a little bit of the sonic monotony that happens on this, because it's very bare. There's not at least as many instruments as, for instance, like a lot of the singles and a lot of the bigger songs on the album. I'm only 24, and I already have huge dad energy. So I think that for this song, one of the reasons it makes me feel so warm and fuzzy is because I like to imagine that I would have that kind of relationship with my daughter.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So it's more like, I think, aspirational for me.
Gotcha. Parting words in terms of the songs on Fearless is that the love story is the best.
Right.
And I think anyone who disagrees is wrong.
Sure.
I just think that, I think that was like a really good peak for her.
Yeah.
Coming, this is like her second album, but it's her first really like super public album. And this is where she started, kind of performing for larger audiences, and I think
that was the banger she needed.
I think she did herself like a really, really good service to come out the gates with Love Story. Yeah. I think it put like a really good taste in people's mouths. Mm-hmm. And it really set the stage for her going into her next album.
Well, one thing I also want to mention about this album is just how fucking, like, singable it is.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, what I was saying about the anthemic choruses and the taglines and stuff like that, it's really easy for an audience to sing along to.
Yes.
And, like, connect with.
Yes.
And I think that in that way, it reads more as a good stadium kind of album.
100%. I think that her producers, her management, the people who are running the label that she had signed to, I think they saw that, her opening for groups like Rascal Flatts. I think she also opened for Colby Calais at one point. I think that they saw that and they were like, okay, we can send her out on her own with an album like this, and she's gonna do really well.
Yeah.
She's gonna be a good stadium performer.
On all of the positive notes, I would just say, as a general kind of review thing for the whole album, overall, I feel very positively about it. I think my personal rating for it has even shifted up. I kind of started with, like, I think I gave it, like, a 6 out of 10 in my head, and now I think it's more of, like, a 6.5. After hearing all of my praise for it, you're probably wondering, well, why isn't it only, like, a 6.5? And my biggest reason for that is that there's just, like, a part in the album that's, like, boring.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's, like, basically after Breathe, there's, like, 4 songs in a row, Tell Me Why, You're Not Sorry, The Way I Loved You, Forever and Always, that to me read as, like, the same song.
Yes.
And then I don't think Change is a strong track to go out on.
No.
It's, like, it's political in a very vague and late 2000s way that I kind of hate.
Yes, but that's how she originally ended the album. That's not how she ended the album for the re-record.
Right. So, now let's talk about the Taylor's version thing. Which now I need you to jump back in and tell us what this is about.
Yeah. So, Taylor signed with Big Machine Records when I believe she was 15. And so she was releasing albums with them. And then it got to the point where, I believe it was 2019, it came time for her to either re-sign with Big Machine or move on to another label. And she did not own any of the masters for anything that she had produced with Big Machine. And so what she wanted to do is she wanted to own her masters for everything she had already made, and then start owning things from the get-go that she will produce in the future. Big Machine basically said no, but that she could earn back those albums one at a time. So if she re-signed with them and produced more, she could start retroactively earning back one album at a time for every new album she released.
Imagine saying this to Taylor Swift.
Yeah. It did not go over
Imagine
well.
the gall.
It did not go
of
over
saying
well.
this to, like, one of the biggest pop artists of all time.
Yeah. Needless to say, she did not re-sign. And she ended up going with Republic Records.
Mm.
With Republic, she now, part of that deal is that she will own everything that was produced under that, but she won't own any of the past stuff. So, Taylor has gone on record saying that she was never given the opportunity to just purchase outright those old masters. Big Machine, the CEO, Scott Borchetta, he's actually quoted saying, Taylor has been given every chance in the world to own her masters.
Somehow I doubt that.
And it's pretty clear that every chance in the world just means make me more music. So anyway, Taylor moves on with a new label. She doesn't own her old stuff, but she does own her current stuff.
And what
Big Machine.
Do you remember what album she, like, owns? Like, when that started? Is it Lover?
I think it might be Lover.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that and on, she owns all of that.
Yes. Scott decides that he is going to sell her masters and some other stuff, some other things from Big Machine.
So, like, it's not only that he won't let her just buy them, he also sells them.
Yes.
To someone else.
Yes. To Scooter Braun.
Yeah.
Taylor and Scooter have historical beef because Scooter it already has signed on to him other artists like Kanye West. Which, you know, I'm sure everyone knows the Taylor Kanye drama. We can get more into that when we talk about Speak Now.
Yeah, that's Speak Now, right? Yeah, okay, cool. I'm excited.
So, you know, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I think it's important for the context to know Scooter Braun was already not a person with whom she could form an alliance.
Right.
Taylor saw this as like a huge slap in the face, as she found it very offensive for her music to be not only sold when it was known that she wanted to buy it, but sold to a person with whom she had issues with. She even reached out to Scooter to see if she could buy her music directly from him. They were never able to make an agreement. I'm sure Taylor had thought of this before, someone on her team had thought of it before, but the word on the street is that Kelly Clarkson, in kind of an offhanded comment, said when all of this drama was going down that, you know, it didn't matter to her personally that she didn't own her music because she didn't write it. But she could see why Taylor would be really upset to not own her music when she is the writer. And that if she were Taylor, she would just re-record everything. And thus Taylor did.
She just fucking starts re-recording it.
Not only that, Taylor Swift begins re-recording all of her music and releasing additional tracks that were intended to be on those albums but never made the cut, encouraging people to buy the new albums even though it's all old music, while Scooter is actively selling her music to another party, thus making that sale essentially worthless.
Yeah. Remind everybody, how much do the Taylor's version albums cost? Each one.
Oh, each one they were super cheap. They were like $9 or something.
Yeah, she was only selling them for like literally pennies.
Yeah.
For like all of the tracks that come with them.
Yeah, so I'm on iTunes right now.
Yeah.
And this album, $11 or $12, and there's 26 tracks on it.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I always have this like weird thing with like Taylor Swift because again, she's like one of the biggest pop stars of all time, so like there's definitely conflicting feelings I have with famous people and capitalism and rich people. So like at once, while Taylor is like, her team is kind of like a capitalist dystopia where she literally like stalled vinyl vendors because she wants Midnight's to have 4 different versions that all make a clock. She does stuff like this where it's like she sells 26 tracks for like $10.
Yes.
For the fans, basically.
Yes.
Just so she can own it.
Right. Her concert tickets, historically have been very cheap, despite the fact that they are like huge theatrical productions.
Yeah.
And there's other comparable stars, musicians, playing in Madison Square Garden 20 shows in a row, whose tickets are like 10 times that amount. So it is interesting how she is like navigating that capitalist system to her advantage, but also to like basically screw over anyone who stands in her way. Like she is willing to take a financial loss if it means that someone else that she doesn't like will take a bigger financial loss.
Which, well, we get into it with that. Everyone already knows, but a big part of the Taylor story is just revenge and spite.
Yes. Which I love and adore.
Yeah, there's like an entire era of that. It's still going on to this day, really.
It's not over.
No.
She starts off with that. I think it's in Speak Now. She has a song called Better Than Revenge. Yeah. So the revenge plot starts early, but she really hits her peak with all of the Taylor's version re-records. So she's still in process of doing that. She's not doing them chronologically, but she has said that her plan is to re-record everything that she doesn't own, so that way she will own those masters. And like I said, she is also releasing a lot of singles and more B-sides and stuff that were intended to be on those albums and just didn't make the cut because of the production team's decisions. Yeah. Like Mr. Perfectly Fine.
Yeah.
Which even got a music video.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to come back to that when we talk about the bonus songs. But really quick before we get into the tracks on Taylor's version of Fearless, I just wanted to mention, you told me that it's uncanny how much the Taylor's version stuff sounds like the original.
Yes.
That's 100% true.
Yeah.
It's like the only difference is like that her voice literally sounds physically older.
Yes.
But all, like, her mannerisms are the same. She completely recaptures the era. Like, literally, like, I did some comparisons, and, like, the stereo field is the same. Like, you can listen to where the instruments are panned in your headphones on Fearless, and then go listen to Taylor's version, and they're the same.
Yes.
It's crazy.
She has gone above and beyond. I wouldn't be surprised if she had, like, forensic audio people analyzing her old tracks to make sure that they were as identical as possible to the new ones.
Yeah. Which is funny to me because it's that feels even more like just a fuck you.
Yes.
Because it's like, I'm not even going to make them different.
Yeah.
I'm literally going to make them the same thing, but I own them now.
Yes. 100%.
That's great. What a power move. But anyway, so I actually, I mostly listened to the original Fearless, and I think I only listened to Taylor's version like a couple times, so I'm less familiar with the bonus tracks than you, so I just wanted you to go through and talk about the highlights from the extra tracks on Taylor's version.
So, I'll say this. Not all bonus songs are created equal.
Yes.
I do think that there's a reason why a lot of these songs didn't originally make the cut. Mm-hmm. I think that these are fun to listen to in the sense that you're almost getting a behind the scenes of like how this album came to be and the kinds of things she was writing and, you know, why a song may or may not have made it. But musically, lyrically, I think for the most part it makes sense that these weren't originally included. The exception to that is Mr. Perfectly Fine.
I don't know why this one didn't make the cut. It's, like, really fun.
It's really good. Word on the street is it's about Joe Jonas.
Which I think is amazing. Maybe that's why I didn't make it. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe her lawyers were like, we can't do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the lyrics are amazing. Like, you're just Mr. Perfectly Fine. Like... There's no better, like, insult to say to somebody.
Yeah.
And then the music is just really good. Like, it almost has, like, a bigger maturity than the rest of the stuff on the album, I think. And I don't know, because obviously we're only listening to the version that she has now.
Yeah.
So we don't know the state of completion it had at the time when Fearless originally came out.
It's possible she touched them up.
Yeah, because there was no previous comparison.
Right.
So she could have judged it. She could have edited some lyrics. She could have made it sound a little bit different. But I think that there's, like, an interesting level of maturity for that song that, you know, kind of sets it apart. And it got a music video.
So, are there any other bonus tracks you want to talk about that are, like, good? Because I have one that's bad.
I don't think so. I think I just really like that.
I just wanted to say I really hated the ballad version of Forever and Always. I feel like it, like, completely tanks the vibe of that song. Like, one of the things that saves that song for me is that it's super melancholy and dramatic, but the music's, like, upbeat. And kind of like, it's alright. It's fine.
It's alright.
You said Forever and Always, but you know what? Life goes on. And that's the ballad is just like, you said forever and always. So it's like it basically takes it from just being kind of cringe to like being way too much.
Yeah.
And I think in general, like, the bonus tracks are great for, I'm sure, big Taylor Swift fans. I think more content for super fans is always good.
Yes.
And preferable to less content.
Yes.
I will say, I mostly understand why these, if they were written at the time, originally didn't make the cut.
Yeah.
Because I think that what they have in the original Fearless is pretty tight and focused, and I think the bonus tracks are less so. Mm-hmm. In general. But really quickly, before we leave, that's really all that I have to say about Fearless and the first album, which is, for the first album, it's barely anything. What do you have to say? to end us?
I think to wrap it up, to summarize, Taylor was clearly finding her footing. She was, gaining popularity. She was integrating into the country scene. But, like, as soon as she was integrating into that scene, she was already, you could tell, planning her exit. And I think that overall the album, like, is a little bit, it's still a little immature.
Right.
But you can tell she's finding a lot more of that maturity than if you compare it to the first album. And I think that she, like, grows pretty fast with that. And that she ultimately, I think, produced a good bit of musical history.
It was a good sophomore, and I wish it was a debut.
Sure.
That's how I feel.
Okay. Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.